Hey guys, welcome back to the At Length podcast. It's your girl, Carter Mia Lisa, and today I have a super special guest with me. I'm going to allow her to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ese Ighedosa, and I am super excited to be here. I am president of House of Athlete, a former NFL lawyer for 6 NFL seasons. So, super excited to join the conversation.
And thank you again for being here. We're going to jump straight into the questions.
Perfect.
So, I want to start with law, and I want to ask you what would you say one of, if not your biggest moment was of your law career?
Ooh, that's a good one. I definitely think when I went to the Panthers to become associate counsel, it really took my career to the next level. And I was able to work on a higher level in every aspect of sports law. So that was really kind of where my career really catapulted.
And what exactly is associate counsel?
Great question. So most teams and most companies have general counsel, which is basically their
Mm-hmm.
in-house attorney. So the Panthers had a general counsel, and I was his second in command, if you will. So it was a team of two lawyers, and we handled everything for our team ownership and the organization. So everything from um, slip and falls in the stadium to doing multi-million dollar sponsorship agreements, as well as everything in between from HR matters to vendor agreements. So kind of really runs the gamut. That's actually, I think,
Mm-hmm.
a beauty of being in-house is that you get to work on a plethora of legal matters throughout the day and, of course, throughout the year.
So you're touching a lot on your career as a lawyer in sports. What exactly did you study for law in school?
I get this question a lot. So there's not that many specializations. Like it's not like medical school where you go to medical school and then you go do more school in your particular field. Most
Mm-hmm.
lawyers study the exact same thing. As you matriculate to your second and third year of law school, you can try to focus on different areas. For me, knowing that I wanted to work in-house, I had no interest in going to a firm. So I worked. I worked to really learn the transactional side of business. So doing agreements, which is a big part of being an in-house lawyer. So I didn't specialize in anything, but I knew I wanted to work in sports. So I took a lot of contract classes and a few business classes as well.
Very smart and super good that you knew where you wanted to go and what area you wanted to work in. Was the bar
Yeah.
exam as hard as, they make it seem?
Listen, that bar exam is no joke. I'm actually barred in Maryland, and it's known for being a pretty difficult bar exam. What I will say is, as difficult as it is, I think the stats are like 70% of people pass, right? And so when you put it in perspective, it is really, really difficult, but majority of people pass. And so I think, if you look at it that way, it's not as scary. And it really is a test of preparation. If you
Mm.
prepare like you're supposed to, the chances of you passing are certainly within your favor because it's really just becoming an expert in that information. And they tell you exactly what's going to be on the exam. They don't tell you how they're going to ask the questions, and they definitely get tricky with how they ask the questions. But yeah, I was traumatized by it. I will say that. Yeah, it was a lot.
Well, I love that you said the stats being 70% pass because that is a great perspective to have to kind of help take the pressure off.
Yeah,
How did you end up in Maryland for the bar exam?
another great question. So I went to FAMU for law school, and actually with Obama's second inauguration, I went to DC and I just fell in love with DC. I fell in love with the culture. I fell in love with, there were so many Hampton alumni. I went to Hampton University for undergrad. So I was like, I'm going to take the Maryland bar. And if you take the Maryland bar and you get a certain score, you can waive into DC, which I think you can waive into DC if you take most state bars. So it didn't make sense for me to take the DC bar, knowing that I could wave in. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I wanted to live in DC and live my best life, and so I took the Maryland bar. It all made sense at the time.
That's what we call balance.
Exactly. Yes.
So, how did you know, or what made you choose sports law? Because you said you knew from pretty early on that that was the area you wanted to work in. How did that come about?
Yeah, so I played volleyball for Hampton University. So I've been an athlete my entire life. And I figured if I'm going to work in sports, it needs to be, if I'm going to be a lawyer and work in law, it needs to be an area that I'm interested in. So sports and entertainment was just that natural synergy where, look, if I'm going to be doing a contract for somebody, I would prefer it to be a subject matter that I'm actually interested in. I
Mm-hmm.
live and breathe sports. I'm an ultra consumer for sports. So it made a lot of sense for me to do that because that's just where my heart was.
And how'd your love for sports come about? You said you played volleyball and you chose it
Yeah, just being
because
an
you had
athlete.
that
I mean,
love.
I'm 6 foot, so sports was always a part of my life. I love the tangibility of sports. I love that um, I can do a sponsorship deal and I see how it affects people, or I see it on TV,
Mm-hmm.
or you're working on things. I used to do contracts for Super Bowl, and you show up to Super Bowl in that city, and you see all the things that you've been working for. And I think the unification of sports is something that has always drawn me to it. You know, you can be from a completely different walk of life, um, different life story. But if you're from Kansas City, you're going to be a Chiefs fan, right? Like you can be at a bar and you're high fiving somebody you don't know anything about, but you guys like the same team. So I love that it's this beautiful thing that brings so many people together for good and bad, right? Like either you connect with somebody over a rivalry or you can connect with somebody because you like the same team or the same player. I love that.
Yeah, it definitely brings people together in the best or worst ways, but
Yeah,
truly getting an environment and in the mood for something. So
for
I
sure.
have admired you for a while, and so I've seen quite a few things that you've been on. And you did mention working on the Trayvon Martin case. How did you end up
Mhm.
on that case?
Yeah, so I was interning my second year of law school for a local law firm and for Natalie Jackson. And she was a well known um, civil rights attorney as well as wrongful death and personal injury attorney. So when I was interning for her, a few weeks into my internship, we got this call about Trayvon's case. I'm just thinking it's another case. She happens to be from Sanford, and so she was going to be local counsel for Ben Crump and be a part of the legal team.
Mm-hmm.
So it really just started off. I was just the intern, just happened working for one of the family lawyers. But then we quickly decided that this is bigger than one case. This is a movement that we need to start. And so I was blessed with the opportunity to help lead the student led movement for the Justice for Trayvon, along with students from FAMU and Florida State. So it definitely morphed into a life changing experience that it necessarily didn't start off that way.
I can imagine that emotions were running high, just being presented with a case like Trayvon Martin, being a
Yeah.
young lawyer at the time, and just kind of getting your feet wet. What kind of impact did that case have on your career?
Oh, I mean, to this day, there's not many days I go by that I don't think about that time and Trayvon. You know, I have a little brother that's 6'8". So
Mm,
when I saw the first images of Trayvon and I heard the story, I was so traumatized because I lived in a predominantly white neighborhood growing up in Kansas City. And my
mm-hmm.
brothers always ran the streets, playing with their friends but we lived there. So this story really hit home for me because my brother is 6'8" and he's black and he with the hoodie on, he probably looks scarier than Trayvon did, quote unquote.
Right.
So it really hit home for me because it wasn't just Trayvon. I felt like this was my brother. My brother could easily be in this situation. Um, and it definitely made me appreciate being a lawyer because I saw the power that these lawyers had to advocate for this family who was lost, right? Like they are simply just grieving their son. They can't strategize on how to get out the word and who to
Yeah.
call. And so it made me appreciate the role that attorneys play. And I think that a lot of people downplay roles that people like Ben Crump play. We forget that the mother, the father, the sister, the brother, they are completely in shock and distraught. But there's not a lot of time to pull a strategy together to get justice. These lawyers are the people that do that. So Ben Crump,
Mm.
as traumatized as he was, as traumatized as we all were, he had to have his game face on at all times. And I think for me, it was a valuable lesson in the power that I was taking on in becoming an advocate. And even though I wanted to work in sports, I knew that this was a God given responsibility to be an advocate. And no matter where I go in my career, I have to use my platform and my agency as an attorney to give a voice to the voiceless, no matter what I'm doing or what industry I'm working in. And that all stems back from Trayvon. I consider it a great privilege to have worked on that because it's given me this endless perspective on how precious life is, how far we have to go in this country, but also the responsibility that I have as an advocate, as an attorney.
A lot of times people don't even realize how, when they think about doctors, they're always like, oh my goodness, the burden that they bear. They don't realize that lawyers oftentimes have a very similar, if not heavier, burden when dealing with cases like Trayvon Martin or anything on that of that magnitude, you know
Yeah,
and so
it's just
that's
it's
a
literally
totally
the
different
best phrase
perspective.
is people hate lawyers until you need one, right? So, everyone has bad things to say about lawyers, but guess what? If your family is mistreated or someone is unjustly killed, the first person you call is a lawyer. They are there to advocate for you. Um, and I think that lawyers get a bad rep until you need them, and that's our job. And um, it is heavy. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
had PTSD for years, after Trayvon because it was you're just in it and you're almost in shock for the whole time. And then honestly, it was like after it all ended was when I was angry for a long time. I was so angry, like so angry. Because I can't separate that. Like if I see Trayvon, I see my little brother. Like
Yeah.
there's no other thing that I see but my little brother, but people that look like my little brother. So yeah, it's definitely a burden, but I consider it a privilege, and I think the best lawyers out there consider it a privilege to seek justice for their clients.
And that's a great perspective that you just presented because, like I said before, a lot of people don't even look at it from that angle or comprehend it on that level. And
Yeah.
with so many injustices like Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, and unfortunately many more, is there anything that you would say in your perspective and from your experience that a lawyer could do to help bring more justice in cases like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we all just have to be more thoughtful, and be more conscious. But I will say it's difficult because I find it also overwhelming. Like I
Mm-hmm.
can't watch any more videos. I can't look at that many more pictures because I'm at my max with Black trauma.
Yeah.
But I do think that a message for everybody is everybody has a role in this fight to make this country a better place, this world a better place, a more equal place, a more equitable place. And I think that everybody needs to find their thing. You don't have to be Ben Crump to get justice or to help seek justice. I think it's one informing our communities, but also, um, you know, using your voice in whatever big or small room that you have. If you work for an organization, are you helping your organization be more in tune with these issues? Are we pushing to donate to the organizations that are doing the work? There's so many things that you can do. And I think people feel like, it's either I'm in the streets protesting or I'm not doing anything. And there's a myriad of things in between where you can help, this cause for justice and for equity.
Definitely. You hit the nail on the head. So you talked about having PTSD and just being traumatized, and basically the whole camp sort of being traumatized from
Mm-hmm.
a case like Trayvon Martin. How do lawyers handle and deal with the aftermath of cases like that, especially, when they lose or feel like they lost
Yeah.
justice?
I mean, I'm not in that space to, to see how they recover and take care of themselves. I think it's very therapeutic to talk about it with people that have been in it with you. I'm a big advocate of therapy as well, and so definitely talking about how you feel. But you have to be able to compartmentalize, and you have to find different ways to escape from your work, and you can't live in that. So, I mean, for a few years I kind of just shut down, where I wasn't doing a lot of social justice work because I was exhausted. I was still traumatized. I was angry, and I didn't want to lead from a place of anger. So I think everyone has their different journey to, um, move forward through those challenging times. I think you have to
Mm-hmm.
figure out what works for you, but absolutely having a tribe of people that get it, that understand, and a safe space to talk about things that maybe you can't say publicly.
And staying on track with the topic of activism and movements of that nature, you worked for the NFL during the
Mhm.
time of Kaepernick taking a knee and kneeling. And do you feel like in the office position that you were in, that you had a voice during that movement?
I think I had a voice. I definitely didn't have the seniority that I probably would have wanted. And so a lot of people are probably like, who does this girl think she is? Um, but I think, in that moment, I knew that a lot of things that I was willing to say, no one else was willing to say. And so I had to take on that opportunity. I think so. I did have a voice because I gave myself a microphone, like I work here. I'm a constituent of the NFL. And I think employees and people of color have to do a better job of considering themselves as constituents. I'm not begging you for anything. I deserve to be heard because I'm a stakeholder in this. I'm an NFL fan. I am an employee, and I have a perspective that I think is valuable for the NFL to hear. And I have good intentions, right? I love the NFL, and I also love my people, and I love my family, and I want to live in a world where my family is safer. Um, so sometimes you can't wait for someone to tap you on the shoulder. You have to raise your hand. And if you believe in the things that you're fighting for and that you're saying, I think you can live with the consequences of
Mm-hmm.
whatever come from it.
And would you call Kaepernick kneeling a movement?
I definitely think so. I think it was, huge for the NFL. The NFL players are not as known to be vocal or as vocal as NBA players because they just don't have as much, autonomy, and certainly as much financial freedom, for the most part, as NBA players. And so I think it was a symbol that the people needed. They needed a martyr. They needed somebody to be able to point to, and I think this was such a clear example for a lot of people. So I think it did, become a huge part of this new civil rights movement. And people to this day use Kaepernick as their symbol of fighting back.
He definitely did make sure he was seen, and
Yeah,
thus leading to him being heard, which ultimately could allow for all of us to be seen and heard.
exactly.
Do you feel like the NFL may have perceived or been more receptive to what he was trying to accomplish by kneeling had it not been spun to be about the disrespect of the flag?
I can't say maybe. I don't think the NFL was ready to talk about civil rights or social
Mm,
justice in general. So I'm not sure what the right way would have been to make it more receptible. I think with things like this, it would have been made into something it wasn't, no matter what he did, right? Because the truth of the matter is, there was a large part of the country and of the NFL fan base that had no intention of acknowledging racism or white supremacy or police brutality or social injustices. So when you have no intention of engaging in a topic, you're not going to engage in it, and you're going to find every reason not to. And so I think that that's what happened, and I think the NFL was simply not prepared to have the conversation. Um, but I think absolutely it becoming about the flag and about disrespecting troops. The NFL wasn't prepared to have that conversation.
definitely. It's really difficult when, you have things like the media, especially now with social media basically taking a forefront media out as a media outlet, kind of doing what they would with what's going on rather than it being
Mm-hmm.
what you're really saying or really doing.
Yeah,
So that's a wonderful perspective. You worked on the corporate side while all of this was going on. And oftentimes, in corporate America, the tension can get thick in the room. Do you feel like, I know you said you gave yourself a mic, but do you feel like you were made, or they made an attempt to make you feel comfortable while all of this was going on? Or do you feel like it was awkward at times?
um, oh, it was definitely an awkward time. I don't think most people at the NFL were ready to have these conversations. Most white people have never had these conversations before. And they
Yeah.
certainly haven't had them in a mixed setting, and they certainly haven't had them with Black people. Um, so it was a super challenging time for me because I worked in legal where there weren't, you know, more than a few Black people in the whole legal department, and they weren't in my specific group. So I had to find camaraderie and solace with um, Black employees that were in other departments. And I think that most people knew me by then. They knew what I stood for. They knew that I was outspoken. But I think a lot of people were uncomfortable having the conversation with me. But I also think most people, white and Black, didn't necessarily know um, where the NFL was going to come down on these issues and what was what. So I think most people just weren't prepared. That's just the best thing I can say. I don't know how much was intentional. I think it was more so just not being prepared to engage in this area um, of culture at all.
I can agree 100% as someone who is in a corporate America setting at people just not knowing how to face the conversation and thus not wanting
Yeah,
to because it's uncomfortable. And when things are uncomfortable, people try not to engage in it
yeah,
for sure. So
absolutely.
diving deeper into sports and your sports career, how long did you work for the NFL?
So I interned with the Minnesota Vikings the offseason of 2012. And then in 2013, I joined NFL Films and the NFL Universe as an intern. So from 2013 to 2018, 2019, sorry, no, 2020. So 7 seasons was my time, including my time in NFL Films. We speak in seasons because the years are off or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically from 2013 to 2020, um, I was in the NFL, 4 years at the league office and almost 2 years at the Carolina Panthers. So
Wow.
I pretty much grew up in the NFL from law school on, and it's been an amazing opportunity to see the NFL try to make strides with being more diverse and more inclusive, and a lot of the things that I had the pleasure of working on and helping to build are growing and still fighting the good fight. So I'm rooting for them from afar at this point.
That's dope. Super phenomenal that you were able to do
Yeah.
that. How did you get your foot in the door?
Oof, cold calls. I made a lot of cold calls to get my first internship at Minnesota Vikings, and that helped me get my internship with NFL Films. But again, I mean, I literally went on the website and applied like everyone else. And when they saw my resume, they called me. And then when they saw that I worked for the Vikings, they called the Vikings. The Vikings put in a good word. So it really is about relationships. And I will
Mm-hmm.
say, having someone in the industry or adjacent to the sports industry that can be a resource, a reference, as well as a sponsor, um, is super beneficial, because we in the sports world, we like to vet people as much as possible, because what we deal with is highly sensitive, it's highly visible. So if I can hire somebody that a colleague that I respect can vouch for, I'm probably going to go with that person over somebody that I don't have any connection to or any reference for. So that's how I got my foot in the door. And I think most people, it's really coming down to meaningful networking and really having someone that's respected in their field, and hopefully the sports field, that can vouch for you and give you at least your first shot.
So groundwork and networking got you in the door.
Yeah. And look, I think understanding that some people, it takes them 2 seconds to break in. Like me, it was my kind of my first job. Or other people, it takes them 5 years, 10 years. You never know. It's so competitive. Everybody wants to work in sports and entertainment. Everyone's willing to make less to work in this industry. So you're
Mm-hmm.
competing with super talented people that, are willing to do just as much or more than you to do this type of work. But build relationships with the right people, become really good at what you do, no matter what it is. And then when you get your big break, you're ready for it.
That's great advice. I'm always pushing to people that number one, you have to, a closed mouth doesn't get fed. So you have to ask, you
Yeah.
have to apply yourself, you have to put in the footwork. But then also, you said building those relationships is so important, that you remain integral and you make a lasting impression, because you never know when that person can be the key to your next step.
Yeah. And you never know who's getting a call about you, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's the biggest thing is, you don't know what rooms your name is in that your feet haven't walked into yet. And so there were conversations happening around me that didn't involve me, but they were about me. And luckily, the people in those conversations, they wanted to see me succeed. They had a good vision of who I was, um, and they vouched for me in conversations that I didn't know about until after the fact. So, and that happens so much in sports. You'll send your resume to somebody, they may not even respond, right? But they'll see that you went to a certain school or you worked at a certain company, and they'll call their friend from that company and be like, "Hey, I just got a resume from about Ashley. Was she there when you were there? Do you know her? Is she crazy? Is she good? Does she actually do this?" You don't even know. Because again, they're not calling you first. They're going to call and do their, call the person that they know. And that person is not going to necessarily give you a heads up that they're giving a reference for you. So you have to be careful about how you put yourself out there. And my whole thing is, I don't think you should fake who you are. You should be exactly who you are and be your best self. So I'm okay with someone saying essay's not a good fit for that if they know who I truly am, right? And I've shown them my best self. I would hate for someone to give a reference for me, good or bad, based on something that I didn't put out there, or I didn't put out there the way that I wanted to. So that's why you always have to treat everybody a certain way and be true to who you are, because you don't know who is getting a phone call about you or making a phone call about you. I've had people refer me for jobs and not even tell me. And then the company's like,
Wow.
"Oh, such and such, said you'd be great for this." I'm like, "Oh, they didn't even tell me that they mentioned me, for this job." That happens all the time in sports. So it just really shows you to always be your best authentic self, so you can, ensure that someone that's speaking about you, they have a really good idea about who you are. Because you should be okay with that. If it's based on who
Yeah.
you really are, you should be okay with that. Whatever they do that's out of malice, you can't control that. I just want to make sure that they know who I am, and they have to speak from that, you know?
That is so true and super powerful. What made you choose the NFL versus one of the other leagues that are out there, like the NBA or the MLB?
Well, I mean, you got to start at the top. No, just um, I mean, I had a loose connection to the Minnesota Vikings, and so that's kind of where I started. But I applied everywhere. You know, I would have went to work at the MLB. I filled out so many applications and sent so many cold emails to people I don't know. I went with who chose me first, but I wasn't picky, and I don't think you can be super picky when you want to work in sports. You kind of have to get in where you fit in, and then you can maneuver around. Um, but you know, it's hard when you start at the NFL because it's like, wow, this is the big league. This is the top
Yeah.
in my opinion. I mean, it kind of is. It's definitely the most powerful sports league in the country. And so starting off there and not seeing that many Black women, I was encouraged to help break, the glass ceiling.
Well, kudos to you for breaking the glass ceiling, and I love the work that you've been doing on behalf of Black women, especially, and just making sure that your voice is heard and taking the risk to give yourself your own microphone, even if they weren't trying to hand it to you. That's
Thank you.
that's so important because oftentimes people are afraid, right? Because you're risking a lot by doing that, right? It's a
Mhm.
risk, and it's a risk that can cost you your livelihood. Like you're not
Yeah,
100% sure how that can turn out for you, but it turned out well for you. And that's a huge deal because you sat at the table and made room for more to sit at the table too, or sit at a different table if they so
yeah.
choose. How many times did you have to argue on behalf of the league? And it may not have been, something that you agreed with or was something that you completely disagreed with.
Hmm. Argue like legally or
Yes, legally.
um, I was a transactional lawyer, so I didn't have to ever, legally defend the league. So yeah, I never really had to like legally defend the league. I just did a lot of contracts. I think I've never gone against my ethical values though for the league, So I've never felt like I was doing something professionally that I felt unethical or didn't, agree with my morals. I will say that, I I criticized the league, but I also am the first to set the story straight. I think there's so much misinformation about the league, and the league does a lot of amazing things. And the NFL was good to me, and I don't want to ever downplay that. I think every organization, in a capitalistic society is going to have issues that you don't agree with. I think the NFL gets a bad rap because we're so visible and it's just an easy target because it's the NFL. They're so powerful. They own a day of the week. So I am a big uh, proponent of. I will be the first to say when the league is wrong, but I will also be the first to say when the league is right and when they do something right.
Balance.
Or if you don't have your facts straight, which there was so much misinformation around Kaepernick and so working on the inside, you also understand that everything you see and read is not true. And I think I am a truth teller. I try to be a truth teller as much as possible. So I'm really big on, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but that's actually not what happened. So,
Yeah. Fake news is a real thing. People try to
yeah,
act like it's impossible to get fake
no,
news,
it
but
is.
it's
And
very
it's the credible
possible and
sources.
very common.
ESPN doesn't always get it right. FS1 doesn't always get it right. Bleacher Report doesn't always get it right. So you really do always have to take everything with a grain of salt because chances are the truth is somewhere there in the middle.
Definitely. There's always three sides to a story. So, and
Yep.
maybe more than that, depending on
Yep.
how many people are
Probably four or
involved.
five dealing with the NFL. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you were part of NFL Films as well as
Mhm.
directly working, for the league and on the administrative side, but legal department. What
Mhm.
led you to switch from, working directly, if you will, for the corporation to going to work with a specific team?
Yeah, from my internship with the Vikings, I knew that I wanted to work at a team one day, and I
Mm-hmm.
thought I wanted to be like the number one, like a general counsel of a team. So, a few years into being at the league office, I kind of focused on getting an opportunity at the team. I wanted to be closer to the game. I wanted to be in a smaller setting. So, I loved my experience in Minnesota, and I wanted that for myself and my career. I think being at the league office, it's a much bigger legal department. So you do one thing. So either you just do, contracts, or you just do litigation, or you just do player issues and employment issues. So being at the team, you get to do everything. And I've always wanted to be a generalist. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what was attractive to me. And Carolina Panthers was always a team that I was interested in going to.
What I love about this conversation with you is that you always pretty much had clear eyesight on where you wanted to end up, even if you didn't know necessarily how or how long
Yeah.
the path was. You knew where you wanted to end up, and sometimes people don't give enough energy to kind of figuring out and finding where they want to end up, you know. And so to me,
Yeah.
that's really great that you were able to do that and know that, even with being a lawyer, because people think, oh, you're just a lawyer, and then it's like, but it's really not. You have to pick a field and then figure out what position in that field you want to be in. So shout out to you for knowing that.
Yeah. No, that's real. And I mean, look, I'll be transparent. I knew I wanted to do certain things, but along the journey, which wasn't easy, and after you get told a no 20 times, I
Mm-hmm.
questioned myself a million times. There were times where I just literally was getting no traction, or I was just getting rejected all the time. Um, and at some point, and I'll get a little spiritual here, I just had to submit to God's will. I was like, look, I thought you wanted me to work in sports. I thought you wanted me to be general counsel. It's not working out. What do you want me to do? Because everything that I'm doing that I think I should be doing is not working. Um, but it goes to show you that I got a million no's. All you need is one yes, right? And you almost have to really take a step back, think about where your heart is, what's your North Star, where do you want to be, and then work your tail off to get there and do all the right things. But you also have to listen to the universe, right? And sometimes the universe or God will tell you where you're supposed to be, and you keep getting no's for certain things. And it's like, either it's not your time or there's not what you're supposed to be doing. And you just have to really be super in tune with your purpose, your strengths, your setting, and really ask for clarity. So a lot of times I just started praying for clarity because this business is so difficult and it's so hard to get opportunities. So it's not always been clear. I knew what I wanted to do, but I also have to wait. I had to wait for that confirmation from God, from the universe, when I got these opportunities, to really show me where I was supposed to be.
God will definitely put you in check, but also lead you down the right path. And all
Listen,
it takes
for
is
sure.
one yes to change your life. I can relate to that. What was it like working and meeting Roger Goodell?
Oh, I actually love Kamish. He has always been very nice to me. We actually bonded in the cafeteria, to the point where I used to change my hair all the time on some true Black girl magic stuff. So, I love that we became so cool that he would be like, "Oh, I like this hairstyle. Are you doing this yourself every night?" Um, but he always took a liking to me. We didn't always agree on everything, but I appreciated him for making me feel seen in
Mm-hmm.
a place where a lot of Black people didn't feel seen. He knew my name. He always spoke. If anytime I see him, he'll stop and speak and give me a hug and ask me how I'm doing. He was super supportive of me going to the Panthers. Um, So I have a lot of appreciation for him because he could have, not that it was right, but he could have treated me like he didn't see me or he didn't know me. I was a junior person. I wasn't important, quote unquote. So I have a lot of appreciation and love for him. And I think that a part of growing for me and maturing for me was being able to separate the person from the job.
Yes.
And uh, Kamish was always nice to me. He was always gracious to me. His wife, his two girls, always gracious to me. Um, that doesn't mean that I agreed with everything he did professionally. But me disagreeing with what he did professionally doesn't need to change how I think about him as a man, as a human, as a leader of people. So everything's not black and white, and that's a part of growing up and working in corporate America. A lot of people and a lot of things live in the gray.
Yeah.
And I learned that with him, you know, personally, I think he's always been great. I think he's done a lot of great things for the league from a business perspective. And there are things that, I think he's learned a lot about in these last few years about social justice and the responsibility that league has. But he's actually really cool. You know, he's really cool, and he's a jokester. Yeah, I wish more people knew who he was as a person because I think he gets a bad rap, and a lot of people just don't know him. But he's actually hilarious.
It brings me back to what you said about lawyers. Like everybody hates the lawyer until they need one.
Yeah,
It's easy to not like a person or claim that you don't like a person because they were able or they decided to make a decision that was harder than you probably could imagine it was, and they just had to go with what they felt was best. Then you meet them and realize, like, oh snap, it wasn't just an easy yes or no kind of decision, but they took their time and they really did do what they felt was best, even if you disagree. And you shouldn't have just yes men around you all the time. You have to have some people that have different views to help you be a well-rounded individual.
for sure. I mean, a lot of people don't know that he reports to the owners. People don't know how the league is structured.
Mm-hmm.
The league office is basically a management company for the 32 team owners. So they basically pay the commissioner and people that work at the league office to run their company, to run the NFL. But all decisions run through those 32 ownership teams.
Mm.
So he has 32 bosses. So if you see him take a position on something or do something, please believe that it has been vetted and signed off by the 32 owners. And that is not an easy position to be in because they all don't always agree on everything.
I
So
can
he
imagine.
is aggregating all of what they want to do and has to make the best decision for the business. So during those difficult times, he was basically hearing everyone out and had to figure out, okay, what do we want to do as a collective? And he makes a lot of money, and but that's what comes with that level of responsibility is the reward, but it's not an easy task when you work for 32 completely different people and or groups that have different interests, different backgrounds, different personalities. So the reason why he's been successful is he's been able to balance all of their wants and needs and continue to make the NFL the most profitable league in the country. But I wouldn't want that job. I don't care how much
Me
money
either.
you
Me either. That's just too many opinions and
have.
personalities for me. I'm good. So I want to ask you, what is the Black ERG and how
Mhm.
did it get started?
The Black ERG Collective in New York.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so when I started the Black Engagement Network at the league office, which is the Black ERG for the NFL, um, we had started at the same time that the NBA started theirs, which is Dream in Color. And I was really just eager to figure out who are the people that are starting these at their companies or running them at their companies because I need best practices and I'm trying to push our ball forward And to do that, I actually used other companies as leverage. I was like, look at what NBC is doing. Look at what Pepsi is doing. These are our partners, and they're doing X, Y, and Z. Everything I'm asking you to do has already been done before, and probably was done like 10, 20 years ago. So
Mm-hmm.
I use them as you know, I use them as political, influence and capital. Like, look, we can't be this far behind all of our partners in this space. So the collective
Right.
kind of grew out of that, where I was reaching out to other Black ERGs. And so Facebook, Twitter, PepsiCo, NBC, ESPN, all of our Black ERG leaders, we formed the collective, where we basically wanted to create a community of Black professionals that work at blue chip organizations, where we can share best practices for our ERGs, but also share opportunities. And I think a lot of Black people in corporate America feel isolated. You might be the only one in your department. You might be the only, the one of few in your whole company. So now we're creating this community that is like that big ERG that includes all companies. And so we started putting on events, educational events as well as social events. But the biggest thing is, how can we create a sense of community across companies, with Black
Mm-hmm.
employees? So it was amazing. And a lot of companies were interested. A lot of Black ERGs were interested. We had a waiting list. I think we still have a waiting list of companies that, their ERG wants to be a part of the collective. And so I was super honored to help found that, because so many people want to fight the good fight at work, and
Yeah.
you don't have to be in the street protesting. You helping your company be more thoughtful, be more educated, be more inclusive. That's a part of the fight too, because we have to go to work, we have to make a living. What's the point of getting the police officer to stop shooting us without asking questions if we can't get a promotion at work, right? Like,
Yeah.
you can't have one fight without the other. And so the work that Black ERGs are doing is God's work, because a lot of times you're not getting compensated for it. You have a full-time job that's probably really difficult. And then you're like
Mm-hmm.
running this whole other job, on the side, just to help your company be more inclusive and to help your fellow Black employees. So that's what the collective is all about. Super proud of what, I helped build, and they've taken it to the next level since I've been out of New York.
And you mentioned blue chip organizations. Can you just elaborate on what that means and what that is?
Yeah, so blue chip organizations are just, those organizations that, usually Fortune 100, Fortune, 200, Fortune 500 companies that are super successful and considered, industry leading organizations, but they also
Mm-hmm.
should be really great places to work, and so that's what we wanted, was those influential companies that had Black ERGs. We wanted them to be a part of the collective.
And so you said that your time at the NFL pretty much stopped in 2020. And so being that
Mhm.
you've left or moved on to other things, how do you ensure that the Black ERG is continuing to hold its integrity and its standpoint? Are you still a part of it, or did you lay out some guidelines for them to follow, being that you were a part of the founding movement?
Yeah, no. So the Black Engagement Network at the NFL, they pick new coaches every year. So
Mm,
they have, amazing leadership now, and they keep me updated, here and there when things happen. But I'm excited to see where they've taken it. And the Black ERG Collective, same thing, like there's Black ERG leaders that helped start the collective with me that are still there. And there's new ones as well that have come on board. And again, I think all of them are seeking to create a sense of community. So while I laid the foundation, I actually am really enjoying new perspectives coming in and taking it to the next level, because my perspective is just one perspective, and
right.
I'm building a whole new company right now, so I don't have a lot of time or capacity to continue that work. But I also love having newer, younger voices at the table to elevate my work. And I think most leaders, that's what you want, right? You want someone to take whatever you did to the next level. And that's a sign of something that you built that's great.
Legacy, for sure. So you work so closely with the NFL, you were in the heart of it. Do you feel that the NFL takes mental health seriously, or that they've gotten more serious about mental health of its athletes?
Yeah, they actually do. The player engagement department, which their sole focus is helping the league and the teams um, provide as many resources as possible to players off the field, and they have a full mental health mini department within there. I worked for the Carolina Panthers. We were the first team to have a full-time therapist on the coaching staff and the football operations staff, which was huge. So most teams do have a therapist, but they're contracted out, just like they contract out different doctors and service providers. So we were the first to say, no, you should literally be full-time and you should be considered a part of the coaching and operations team. Your office should be right next to the coaches because we treat mental health just as important as your physical health. So I think the NFL, I think there's so much more that they can be doing and they're learning. Um, but I think they definitely are taking great strides in the right direction because it's a foregone conclusion that mental health of players is so important to
Yeah,
performance, but also creating a great work environment. And so I think the NFL has been pretty intentional or tried to be intentional in the mental health space, but there's definitely a lot of work to be done.
that's good to hear that they're at least taking it seriously. I'm
Yeah.
a mental health advocate. As someone who's gone through their own experiences and tribulations pertaining to that, and I love that the world is kind of becoming more aware and allowing more
Yeah.
spaces where it's okay to discuss these things,
And
and
that's
where
what they're trying to
companies are.
do. Yeah,
Yeah,
they want to,
because
we
it's
need to
needed.
destigmatize it, and it can't just be, um, oh, go see your therapist, but keep it like, no, like, you have to make it a part of your everyday conversations about health. And, where I am now at House of Athlete, that's what we do. House of Athlete was founded by Brandon Marshall, and he's a huge mental health advocate. He was one of the first active players to come out with a mental health diagnosis. And our whole philosophy is your mental health is just as important, as your physical
Yeah.
health. And you going to see a therapist should be just as important as you going to look over your plays or, work out. Um, and so we've taken that position very seriously. And I think there's a lot to be said for that holistic approach to health. And I think the NFL is in the right direction, but certainly House of Athlete, that's our whole belief system.
I love to hear it. It's necessary. I have one big question that I really wanted to ask
Mm-hmm.
pertaining to like the NFL and things of that nature is how much liability does the team have in regards to like head injuries or player safety in regards to head injury?
Yeah, so I mean that's a big question and a constant focus for the NFL. So the league office really manages that for the most part, and they give directives to teams. But it certainly is centralized, so the safety standards can be the same across the board. Um, I think it's an ongoing conversation. It's difficult in that the NFL and football is an inherently dangerous contact sport. So
Very much so.
you have to find this delicate balance of absolutely making it safe, but calling it what it is, right? Like there is no football that is going to be injury free because it's a violent and physical game. I think the ongoing questions, and you see the rules are changed almost every season, um, is how can we keep the integrity of the game the same and the parts of it that they love, but make it as safe as possible. So everything from, the NFL, they literally sponsor studies for people to create better helmets, to study concussion issues. There's a lot of money, time, and energy that goes into trying to make the game safer to the point where fans even complain that the game is too soft now.
Yeah.
But they have to, so that's one end of the spectrum. But then there's people that say, it's too violent and I'm not letting my kid play. And that's another thing the NFL is concerned about is less kids were playing football. Well, that's of interest to the NFL because that's our pipeline talent. We
Right.
need as many people as possible to be playing football because that's our future workforce. That's our future talent. So they have to find a way to make the game safer for parents to let their kids play, um, but keeping the game what it is and as exciting
Right.
as it is. So it's certainly a focus, but I think it's such a difficult task because the game is so inherently physical. How do
I can
you mitigate?
imagine. It sounds very challenging. Just
Yeah.
that whole. It's just so many moving parts, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to keep a game that the reason why so many people love it is the immense level of
Yeah.
contact, but then
Right.
seeing how it wears and tears
On the
on a
body.
player is a concern, and then to not have more players coming in is an even bigger concern on some
Yeah.
regard. So definitely it can be challenging. What would you say is the owner's biggest concern in negotiations with the NFL Players Association, and why?
I mean, the biggest concern is always the revenue share, right? Like, I mean, it always comes down to the money. I think that, both sides always are going to want to get the most money, out of the biggest piece out of the pie. So it always comes down to rev share and what's considered, revenue that needs to be shared with the teams and with the players. So I think that's always the hot button issue. I think the players care about, money as well as health and safety. So yeah, those are very complex negotiations, but it typically usually comes down to revenue share as the biggest, hot button issue.
And do you agree that that should be the biggest concern, or do you think that they're overlooking something else?
I think that, you know, we live in a capitalistic society. It's a for-profit business. So I'm not going to have rose-colored glasses that they're not going to care about the money the most. Obviously, issues like health and safety, ongoing benefits for former players is an issue that still needs to, be better addressed, as well as some of those things like mental health and things like that. But I think the NFL actually has a decent set up for benefits for players and former players. Um, I think it's really, how do they have a better relationship? I know it's going to be inherently adversarial between players and the
Mm-hmm.
league, but I think, focusing on some of those issues can bring them together.
That's a great perspective. So I want to segue, kind of out of the NFL. We've spent a lot of time
Mm-hmm.
talking about that, and I
Mm-hmm.
want to touch on women in sports. You have
Mm-hmm.
been on record, I believe multiple times, stating that you believe that Serena Williams is
Yeah,
the best athlete of all time or greatest athlete of all
greatest
time,
athlete of
the
all
GOAT.
time. Yeah,
Do you still feel that way?
1000%.
And
No doubt in my mind.
and why do you feel like Serena is over other players like a LeBron, MJ, Kobe?
I think that when you look at, she almost, along with her sister, single-handedly changed the face of a very white and affluent sport. So we have a
For
black
sure.
girl, black girls from Compton come into one of the richest, whitest sports known to man and literally dominate for over 20 years. Um, that is unheard of, and I think that we don't give her enough credit for that. And when I say become the face, it's not just symbolic. She literally has dominated the sport. Like she's been the top player in the game for 20 years. So I have no intention of overlooking that. I think also, um, it's a game where she's literally getting people's best games that they've ever played in their entire life. There's people that have beat her that literally haven't won anything because everybody you have nothing to lose when you play her. And because everybody's expecting you to lose. Nobody's expecting you to win against Serena Williams. Well, as an athlete, that gives you an advantage because there's no expectation on you. So you can go
Mm-hmm.
out there and play your heart out, and there's no pressure because nobody's expecting you to win. I don't think other athletes like Jordan and LeBron have that same journey, right? Like I think people play them and it's not always like, oh, you're going to lose to LeBron every single time. I don't think that's an assumption when you play LeBron or when you play Jordan. Um, so I think what she's been able to do for the length of time that she's been able to do it, even if you think about these last 3+ years after she gave birth, um, she's still making it to the finals, right? Like that's
Yeah.
not easy. So while she hasn't won that additional full tournament, she's literally still making it to the finals, which is very hard to do, and that's she's trying to get over this hump. But let's even just look at that, right? Like making it to the finals of these tournaments is not easy, like these grand
At
slams.
all. And a lot of people don't know what pregnancy does to the body or
Yeah,
giving
and she
birth.
literally almost died from her pregnancy. Like she didn't even have an easy pregnancy. So I think the pressures of that, I think being a mom, being a Black woman, being a dark skinned Black woman where you don't fit any of the commercial stereotypes of what pretty looks like and what marketable looks like. I think all those things that she's overcome, I don't see anyone being a greater athlete than her, because she has the symbolism. She's always been an advocate for Black women. She's always given back, but she's also always been the best on the court for the last 20 years. So
Yeah. I would love to see a lot more people put some respect on her name for sure because
I
she
mean,
has
the disrespect
overcome
is real.
things. People don't know like what it's like as a woman or as a woman who has bore a child. They don't understand the
Yeah.
complications that come with it, let alone actually having a complicated pregnancy. So it's wonderful that you were able to just pinpoint all those things about her and her career. Do you feel like there's any other women that should be considered when talking about the best athletes? Because oftentimes when someone says the best athlete, there's not a woman mentioned at all.
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, I think Serena is the clear um leading woman there. I mean, you have people like Sue Bird. Um, oh, yeah. I mean, it's really Serena for me, to be honest. And a part of that probably speaks to the issue of women's sports not being as popular and not getting the
Mm-hmm.
respect from a media standpoint. I think what she's done for her game is astronomically better than most have done. But I think Sue Bird is up there. There's a few other WNBA players that are amazing. I just think the level of competition that Serena has gotten and what she's done for her sport is just something you can't overlook.
Yes, in a category of its own.
Yeah,
So
it's
we're
incomparable.
in 2021. Do you think that the majority of women still lack interest in sports?
No, I think that's such a myth. I think, even like the NFL, like they started focusing on the woman fan because the female fan because they were one of the fastest growing fan bases of football. I think the sports aren't necessarily speaking to the female fan, and that's what needs to change. When you watch documentaries on NFL films, they don't have women doing voiceover. Games like women commenting on games and giving that female and woman perspective on games. Like when you turn on ESPN, do you see a woman talking about sports or just moderating two men talking about sports? So I
Mm,
think that there are things that we can do better in the industry to invite women to the conversation, invite them to the game, make them feel welcome. And having a woman's perspective is valuable. I see things differently. So when I argue sports with guys, I know my stuff, but I also have a unique perspective because
yeah.
women just think differently. And I think when we're given the opportunity to speak on sports, people enjoy it. We're just not given that opportunity. So I
Mm-hmm.
think all of those different things would help increase, women consuming sports. But I think there's, I think most women like some type of sport.
Overall, do you think that women just naturally are more inclined towards being like nurturing and like taken to less strenuous activities than sports?
No, I think that society tells, us to, right? Like I think that it's more so societal than us. Like most most women, you start off playing sports and then you just stop, but I
Yeah.
think what's happening in middle school and grade school and high school where women are stopping, right? Why aren't we continuing? One, because we don't necessarily see the career opportunities in sports, right? So there's not a lot of professional women's sports where you can make a great living. And then you don't see women working on the business or the operation side of male professional sports. So I think naturally we're being pushed in a different direction where
Right.
once we create more visibility to work in sports, you might play sports longer because you see a future there in some capacity. So I think that's where the opportunity is, but I don't think it's because they don't enjoy it. I just don't think that um, our society has given us a lot of options on how to play, in sports long term.
It can be extremely challenging to continue on when you feel like you're not being catered to in that way after seeing,
Mm-hmm.
the other gender being so well catered to
Yep.
pertaining to it. So that's definitely something that us as women face.
Yeah.
You've also been very vocal about, seeing more and aiding in more women being in sports and in the sports world and the advancement of black women in those positions. How have you achieved this thus far?
I think it's just about using your voice, you don't have to have this big platform, if your department is hiring, you know, use your voice. Oh, who are the candidates? Is there a woman candidate? Is there a person of color candidate? Is there a black woman candidate? Is there a woman of color candidate? It starts there. You don't have to have a big position or a big platform. I think it's being intentional. So for me, I was always intentional about one, being visible because I knew when I was coming up, I didn't see any black women that looked like me working in the NFL. So I wanted to let the middle schoolers know that this is a career path that's available to you. So I think,
Mm-hmm.
being more visible, speaking about what I'm doing, educating on career opportunities, that's how I've kind of built this brand of, me being an advocate for Black women and women in sports. It really just starts with if they can see it, then they can be it. And I knew that we needed to see more Black women doing it. So girls want to be it, like they may not want to do it because they don't even know it exists, right? They don't know that there's lawyers that work in football, that you didn't have to play football, you don't have to know football really. Like we need to tell girls that because right now they don't
Yeah.
even feel like they're invited to the party. So
Representation
that
matters.
representation matters, and seeing it. And so I have done my little part, and there's a lot of women fighting the good fight to show young girls and teenagers and young women that you have a place in football, you have a place in sports, and you have like, and they need it. Like they
Yeah.
really more of these rooms um should have women, because we just think so differently. And so there's things that I point out that men didn't even, they're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, because you don't think like that, you don't think like that at all. I think differently. That's why diversity is important.
Definitely. I think more need to know that they can and that it is
Yeah.
possible or that, like you said, it's available because a lot didn't know. Like I didn't necessarily know because I didn't grow up seeing that. It was always the man, right? So the
Yep.
boys can do it. My brothers could
Yep.
do it. Or theirs was more important. So it's like you turn away from it like, all right, well, I'm putting too much energy into this for it not to be a
Yeah.
thing. So
Right.
let me just walk away from this and keep it pushing because I don't have time to waste. So for sure
Yep.
that's super important. And a lot of people don't know that's something as simple as just presenting yourself before a middle school student is making a even bigger difference than giving someone a position, because now the
Yep.
future and the children are the future. So I want to shift gears into House of Athletes, because you did mention that you're a part of it, and I know that you are the president of House of Athletes. How did that come about?